October 15, 2023. Master Chen Wei had been teaching children's kung fu classes for 15 years, the old man stretching in Golden Gate Park that morning. That's exactly why the 260-pound fighter chose him to humiliate on livestream. Tank Morrison walked up, laughed at the old fossil doing his little stretches, and shoved Chen to the ground in front of 2 million viewers. The first call came at 12:47 a.m. Pacific Time. Chen Wei sat in his small apartment above the Dragon's Heart martial arts studio, watching the video for the 100th time. His weathered fingers trembled slightly as he held the phone, not from age, but from the rage he'd spent 15 years learning to bury. On the screen, Tank Morrison's meaty fist connected with Chen's shoulder, sending the old man sprawling across the damp grass. The MMA fighter's voice boomed through the phone speaker. "Look at this ancient relic. Probably thinks he's some kind of kung fu master." 2 million people had watched it live, 50 million more in the hours since. Chen watched himself rise from the ground with fluid grace that belied his 67 years. He watched Tank's cocky grin falter as Chen moved, not like an elderly Tai Chi enthusiast, but like flowing water suddenly becoming a tsunami. The phone's vibration snapped him back to reality. Wei? Silence. Then breathing. Heavy, deliberate. "I know it's you, Ghost." The voice carried a Cantonese accent thick with hatred. 15 years I've been searching. 15 years since you murdered my brother." Chen's blood turned to ice water. Tommy Zhao, little Tommy, who used to bring his older brother Lu oranges during training sessions at the military compound in Guangzhou. Tommy, who'd sworn vengeance at Liu's funeral. The funeral Chen couldn't attend because he'd been the one to snap Liu's neck to stop the massacre Liu had planned for the embassy district. "You have the wrong number," Chen said quietly. A low chuckle. Tank Morrison's little stunt was quite the gift, though I suspect our American friend had no idea what kind of demon he was poking. "The Zhao family remembers, Ghost. We remember what you took from us." The line went dead. Chen set the phone on his kitchen table and walked to the window overlooking Grant Avenue. Even at this hour, Chinatown pulsed with life. Late-night dim sum restaurants, neon signs reflecting off wet pavement, elderly men playing xiangqi under streetlights. This community had given him sanctuary when he'd fled China with nothing but blood on his hands and nightmares in his head. Mrs. Lin's granddaughter Amy would be here at 7 a.m. for her morning lesson, the same as every Tuesday for 3 years. Bright-eyed, 8 years old, calling him Ye like he was really her grandfather, the highlight of his carefully constructed ordinary life. The phone buzzed again. This time the voice was different. Younger, American, but speaking Mandarin with surprising fluency. "Master Chen, my employer wishes to meet. He has a proposition regarding your recent exposure. I run a children's martial arts school, nothing more. We know exactly what you run, Ghost, and we know what you used to be. Pier 33 tomorrow night. Come alone or the Zhao family won't be your only problem." Chen ended the call and pulled up the video again. This time he focused not on Tank Morrison's performance, but on the crowd. His trained eye picked out details others would miss. The woman in the red jacket who never looked at her phone during the entire altercation. The man with the camera who'd positioned himself for the perfect angle before Tank even approached. The jogger who'd stopped running but kept checking his watch. This hadn't been random. Tank Morrison might have thought he was just picking on an easy target for his followers, but someone else had orchestrated this moment, someone who knew exactly who Chen Wei really was. The third call came at 2:33 a.m. Shifu. Master. The formal address made Chen's chest tighten. "Li Ming?" I saw the video. Half of Beijing saw the video. They're asking questions. The kind that make people remember why Ghost of Guangzhou disappeared. Li Ming had been Chen's most promising student before Liu, before everything went wrong. Now he ran a security firm for Chinese businessmen in Hong Kong. "You need to disappear again. Tonight." "I can't." "Shifu, you don't understand. It's not just Tommy Zhao. Word is spreading through the triads, the military, even some government circles. The man who executed Lu Zhao just revealed himself to the world. There are bounties being placed as we speak." Through his window, Chen watched a black sedan park across the street. It had been there for 20 minutes. The engine was off, but no one had gotten out. How long do I have? Maybe 48 hours before the first teams arrive. Maybe less. Li Ming's voice carried genuine fear. That American fighter, he has no idea what he's unleashed. Chen hung up and moved away from the window. In his bedroom closet, behind 15 years of humble civilian clothes, a locked case waited. Inside lay the ghost's tools. Throwing knives balanced to perfection, pressure point charts marked with his own notations, and photographs of 37 confirmed kills. Tomorrow, Amy Lin would arrive for her lesson, eager to show him the form she'd been practicing. Tonight, the ghost of Guangzhou had to decide if Master Chen Wei was worth dying for. The black sedan's doors finally opened, and 3 figures emerged into the San Francisco darkness. Chen moved away from the window with the silent grace that had once made him a phantom in the corridors of power. The 3 figures below walked with purpose, their movements coordinated in a way that spoke of military training. Not triads, too disciplined, not local thugs, too patient. Professional operators. He had perhaps 5 minutes before they reached his door. In the darkness of his small apartment, Chen's fingers found the familiar weight of the tea kettle on his stove. Steam still curled from the spout. He'd been brewing chrysanthemum tea when Li Ming's call shattered his evening meditation. The delicate porcelain cup sat untouched on the counter, painted with cranes in flight. Amy had given it to him for his birthday last year, her small hands carefully counting out dollar bills and quarters from her piggy bank. "Yi, you need something beautiful for your tea," she'd said, her gap-toothed smile lighting up the modest studio below. Nai Nai says beautiful things make the tea taste like happiness. Chen lifted the cup with steady hands and took a slow sip. The chrysanthemum was slightly bitter. He'd steeped it too long while watching the street, but the warmth spread through his chest like a prayer, carrying with it the memory of Amy's laughter during Sunday dim sum, Mrs. Lin's gentle scolding when he gave the child too much attention, the way the old-timers in Portsmouth Square nodded respectfully when he passed. 15 years of this. 15 years of being Lao Chen, old Chen, who taught children to bow properly and helped Mrs. Wang carry her groceries up 3 flights of stairs. Who played Shang-Ti with Master Lu the barber, no relation to the other Lu, the one whose neck he'd snapped, and never won because winning would require the kind of tactical thinking that belonged to someone else entirely. Footsteps on the stairs now. Measured, careful not to creak the 3rd step that always groaned under pressure. Chen set down the teacup and closed his eyes, allowing himself one last moment of being the man Amy called grandfather. In 6 hours she would climb these same stairs, her backpack bouncing against her small frame as she chattered about school and friends and the cat that lived in the alley behind her building. She would bow formally at the threshold of the studio, then giggle and rush into his arms for a hug that smelled like strawberry shampoo and childhood. "Yi, watch me do the crane form. I practiced every day like you said." Her dedication reminded him of another student, years ago and worlds away. Lu Zhao had possessed that same eager hunger to learn, to perfect, to become something more than what he was born to be. Chen had nurtured that hunger, shaped it, refined it into something beautiful and deadly, right up until the moment he discovered Liu's plan to use those skills to massacre 37 foreign diplomats and their families, including a 6-year-old girl who would have been about Amy's age now. The memory of Liu's eyes in those final seconds, the betrayal, the rage, the terrible understanding that his master had become his executioner, lived in Chen's chest like a shard of ice. It was the price of mercy disguised as murder, of saving 37 innocent lives by destroying the one person who had trusted him completely. A soft knock at his door. 3 short taps, polite as a neighbor borrowing sugar. Chen opened his eyes and looked around the apartment that had been his sanctuary. Photos of Amy covered the refrigerator. Gap-toothed grins, martial arts poses, a crayon drawing of him teaching her to punch that somehow captured his likeness with a child's brutal honesty. The couch where Mrs. Lin sat every Sunday, critiquing his cooking while secretly adding ingredients to his grocery list. The small altar where he burned incense for parents he'd never see again, and friends whose deaths he'd caused by being who he was. Another knock, more insistent. Chen walked to his bedroom and knelt beside the bed. His fingers found the hidden latch beneath the mattress, and a section of floorboard lifted silently. Inside the hollow space, wrapped in black silk, lay the tools of the ghost of Guangzhou. Knives that could find a heart through the smallest gap in armor. Pressure point charts that mapped the human body like a musician's sheet music. Every nerve, every vulnerable junction, every way to bring death or paralysis with a touch. And beneath it all, a single photograph, Liu Zhao at 18, grinning beside a punching bag, sweat-soaked and proud after mastering a particularly difficult combination. The student who had become a monster, the monster Chen had created, the monster Chen had destroyed to save the innocent. Chen's fingers hovered over the weapons. Once he touched them, Master Chen Wei, Amy Zaiye, Mrs. Lin's helpful neighbor, the gentle old man who taught children to respect their elders, would begin to die. The ghost would rise in his place, bringing with him everything Chen had spent 15 years trying to bury. The third knock came with the sound of splintering wood. Chen's hands closed around the silk-wrapped knives as his front door exploded inward. 3 figures in tactical gear poured through the opening, their movements sharp and efficient, but they stopped dead when they found him standing in the bedroom doorway, no longer the humble Lao Chen who swept his stoop every morning. The ghost of Guangzhou held the throwing knives with casual familiarity. His posture shifted into something that made the air itself seem dangerous. The lead operative, a woman with cold eyes behind tactical goggles, raised her hand to signal her team to hold position. Master Chen Wei. Her English carried a Beijing accent refined by expensive education. "My name is Colonel Hua. We need to talk. You have a strange way of requesting conversation. We have 30 seconds before Tommy Zhao's advance team reaches this building. You can come with us alive, or they can find your body. Your choice." Chen's thumb tested the edge of the blade, still razor-sharp after 15 years. And why would the People's Liberation Army want to save me from the triads? Colonel Hua smiled without warmth. Because Tank Morrison's little stunt wasn't random chance. You were targeted, exposed deliberately. Someone wanted the ghost of Guangzhou to surface. She gestured toward his window. "Look outside." Chen moved to the window, keeping the knives ready. The black sedan was gone, replaced by 3 motorcycles and a van. Men in leather jackets were already surrounding the building, their movements less disciplined than the soldiers in his apartment, but no less deadly. "Tommy Zhao works fast," Colonel Hua continued. "But he's not the real problem. The man who orchestrated your exposure. He's playing a much larger game." "What man?" Instead of answering, Colonel Hua pulled out a tablet and showed him a photograph. Chen's blood turned to ice water for the second time that night. The face on the screen was older now, scarred along the left temple, but unmistakable. Captain Marcus Reed, the American CIA operative who had been Liu Zhao's handler. The man who had turned Chen's student into a weapon aimed at China's diplomatic corps. The man whose betrayal had forced Chen to become executioner to his own protege. Impossible. Reed died in the embassy bombing. I saw his body. You saw what you needed to see. Reed survived, disappeared into deep cover. Spent 15 years building a new identity. Colonel Hua's fingers swiped to another image. Tank Morrison shaking hands with a man whose face was turned away from the camera. He's been Marcus Thompson, MMA promoter and talent scout for the past decade. Very successful at finding fighters with interesting backgrounds. The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. He knew who I was. The entire confrontation was designed to flush you out. The question is, why now? What does Reed want with the ghost of Guangzhou after 15 years? Gunfire erupted from the street below, sharp cracks of pistols answered by the deeper bark of automatic weapons. Tommy Zhao's men had met resistance, but Chen couldn't tell from whom. "We need to leave. Now." Colonel Hua moved toward the destroyed door, her team flanking her. Chen looked back at his apartment one last time. Amy's drawings still clung to the refrigerator, innocent crayon figures that would never again greet him when he came home from teaching gentle children to bow and breathe and find peace in motion. The chrysanthemum tea grew cold in its beautiful cup, the cranes forever frozen in flight. His phone buzzed with an incoming message. The text was simple, devastating. "We have the girl. Pier 33, midnight. Come alone, or she joins her grandfather in death. M." Below the words was a photograph that stopped Chen's heart. Amy Lin, 8 years old and terrified, zip-tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. Her school uniform was torn, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes held a defiance that reminded Chen why he'd allowed himself to love her like the granddaughter he'd never had. Colonel Hua read the message over his shoulder and cursed in Mandarin. Reed has the child. This was never about revenge or triads or unfinished business from Guangzhou. Then what? Bait. You're not the target, Master Chen. You're the weapon he intends to aim at someone else. She gestured toward the window where muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. And all of this, Tommy Zhao, the viral video, even us, we're just pieces on a board Reed's been arranging for 15 years. Chen wrapped the knives back in their silk and tucked them inside his jacket. Whatever game Marcus Reed was playing, whatever target he had in mind, it no longer mattered. Amy Lin was innocent. She called him Ye Ye and made him chrysanthemum tea taste like happiness. For her, the ghost of Guangzhou would kill anyone. Even the man who had created him. Lead the way, Colonel, but understand, after I get Amy back, Reed belongs to me. Chen Wei was already dead. What walked toward the shattered door was something far more dangerous. The descent into Chinatown's labyrinthine alleyways felt like swimming through Chen's own nightmare. Colonel Hua led them through service corridors and basement passages that connected buildings like arteries beneath the skin of the neighborhood, each step taking them deeper into a world Chen thought he'd left behind forever. Stop, he whispered, as they reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. This is wrong. We're being herded. Colonel Hua's hand moved to her sidearm. What do you mean? You know these passages too well. Either you've been planning this extraction for months, or... Chen's enhanced hearing caught the subtle scratch of fabric against concrete from the tunnel behind them. Or, someone's been feeding you information. The colonel's radio crackled with static. She raised it to respond, then froze as a voice came through. Not her handler's crisp Beijing accent, but something else entirely. Colonel, this is Mongoose. Package is compromised. Repeat, the package is compromised. Chen Wei is not what he appears to be. Chen felt ice crystallize in his veins. Mongoose, Reed's old CIA call sign. He's in your communications, Chen breathed. He's been listening to everything. Colonel Hua's face went pale as understanding dawned. The whole operation. He knew we were coming for you, which means he knows exactly where we are right now. As if summoned by his words, footsteps echoed from all 3 tunnels simultaneously. Not the heavy boots of Tommy Zhao's street soldiers, but the measured pace of professional operators. Chen pressed himself against the damp concrete wall, his mind automatically cataloging escape routes that didn't exist. How many men do you have topside? He asked. 6, maybe 8 if the backup team made it through Zhao's blockade. Colonel Hua checked her weapon with the mechanical precision of someone buying time to think. Not enough if Reed's been planning this. Chen closed his eyes and reached for the calm that had once made him invisible in places where invisible meant alive. But instead of the ghost's cold clarity, he found only Amy's terrified face staring back at him from that warehouse photograph. 8 years old, calling for Hera Yi Yi, while zip-tied to a chair because a monster from his past had decided to use her as bait. This is what loving someone costs, he thought. This is why the ghost worked alone. Colonel. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. How long have you been tracking me? What? Simple question. How long has the PLA known where to find Chen Wei? Her hesitation lasted a fraction too long. 18 months. Since the surveillance upgrade in... Chen opened his eyes, and Colonel Hua took an involuntary step backward. I swept for surveillance every week for 15 years. Found your cameras, your listening devices, your facial recognition software. Disabled most of them. The others I fed false information. So I'll ask again, how long? The footsteps were getting closer now. Multiple teams, coordinated timing, professional spacing. Chen counted at least 12 operators converging on their position. 5 years, Colonel Hua whispered. But we weren't the only ones watching. There were others. Americans we thought, but their surveillance was different, more personal. like someone who knew your habits, your routines. Someone who knew I'd grown soft. Chen's hand found the silk-wrapped knives inside his jacket. Someone who understood that the ghost of Guangzhou had become a grandfather who made tea for children. Colonel Hua's radio crackled again, this time with her actual handler's voice. "Hua, report status. We've lost contact with your team." She looked at Chen with something approaching respect. "He cut us off from our support. We're alone down here." "No," Chen said softly. "You're alone down here. I'm exactly where I've always been, caught between the man I was and the man I tried to become." The first muzzle flash lit up the tunnel to their left. Colonel Hua returned fire while Chen melted into the shadows that had been his allies for so many years. But even as his body moved with the ghost's deadly precision, his mind remained trapped in the image of Amy's tears. Reed had studied him for 15 years, had watched him teach children, had seen him grow to love this borrowed life, had waited until Chen had something precious to lose before springing his trap. The cruelest part wasn't the manipulation, it was how perfectly Reed understood his target. Chen Wei would die before he let harm come to Amy Lin, and Marcus Reed was counting on exactly that. The ghost of Guangzhou emerged from the darkness behind the first operative, like a promise, kept to violence itself. The ghost's blade found the soft space beneath the operative's jaw before the man could scream. Chen's other hand caught the body as it fell, lowering it silently to the tunnel floor while Colonel Hua's gunfire masked the sound of death arriving without fanfare. But as Chen wiped blood from his fingers, something inside him cracked like porcelain hitting stone. The movement had been perfect, exactly as he'd taught Liu Zhao 15 years ago in a training facility outside Guangzhou. Strike here, and the blade severs the carotid artery while puncturing the windpipe. Death in 12 seconds. Silence in 3. Liu had practiced the technique on watermelons first, then cadavers, his young face bright with the terrible joy of mastery. "Master Chen," he'd said after his first flawless execution, "I understand now why they call you the Ghost. You make death look like art." Chen had been proud then, proud of his student's dedication, his precision, his evolution from street orphan to perfect weapon. He'd never questioned where that weapon might be aimed until the night he discovered Liu's target list spread across a hotel room table, like a dinner menu of the damned. 37 names. Diplomats and their families attending the Cultural Exchange Summit, including Ambassador Morrison's 6-year-old daughter, whose crime was having been born to the wrong father in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Did you know?" Liu had asked when Chen confronted him in that sterile hotel room. "Did you know what they were training me for when you taught me to kill?" Chen had known. God help him. He'd known from the beginning that Liu Zhao was being forged into an instrument of terror, and he'd done it anyway because the boy reminded him of himself at 18, hungry, brilliant, desperate to become something more than the sum of his circumstances. Now, crouched in these tunnels with another man's blood on his hands, Chen felt the weight of every lesson he'd ever taught pressing down on his chest like stones. Colonel Hua's radio crackled with panicked voices as her team fell apart under coordinated assault, but Chen barely heard them. He was remembering Liu's face in those final moments. Not hatred or rage, but disappointment so profound it had cut deeper than any blade. "You made me into this," Liu had whispered, as Chen's hands closed around his throat. "You made me love killing, and then you kill me for doing exactly what you taught me to do." Chen's second knife found the next operative's heart with mechanical precision, but his hands were shaking now. Somewhere above them, Amy Lin sat zip-tied to a chair, probably wondering why her grandfather hadn't come to save her. She didn't know that Harry Yi was the reason monsters like Marcus Reed existed in the first place. "Chen," Colonel Hua's voice cut through his spiral of self-recrimination. "We're pinned down. I count 8 more moving in from the north tunnel. 8 more. Chen could kill them all, had killed more with less favorable positioning. But each death would be another weight added to the scale that had been unbalancing him for 15 years. Another face that would visit him in the quiet moments when Amy's laughter wasn't loud enough to drown out the ghosts. He thought of Mrs. Lin, probably pacing her kitchen right now, wondering why her granddaughter hadn't come home from school. The old woman had trusted him with the most precious thing in her world, had called him family in the way that made Chinatown feel like home instead of exile. What would you do, he wondered, if you knew what your neighbor really was? The radio in Colonel Hua's hand buzzed with an incoming transmission. This time the voice was clear, unfiltered by static or distance. Marcus Reed speaking with the casual confidence of a man holding all the cards. Chen Wei, I know you can hear this. I've been watching you play grandfather for 15 years, and I have to say, it's been fascinating. The ghost of Guangzhou buying ice cream for children, teaching them to bow properly, tucking them in with bedtime stories about honor and respect. Chen's grip tightened on his remaining knife until his knuckles went white. But here's what I find most interesting, Reed continued. You never told her the truth, did you? Never explained to little Amy why you know so much about fighting, why your hands move like they do, why sometimes you wake up screaming in languages she's never heard. Colonel Hua was watching Chen's face with growing alarm. Don't listen to him. It's psychological warfare. Because you know, Reed's voice carried the satisfaction of a surgeon opening the exact right wound, that if she understood what you really are, she'd run screaming. Just like Liu Zhao should have run the day he met you. Chen closed his eyes and saw Amy's crayon drawing on his refrigerator. 2 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun, labeled I, Yi, and me in her careful second-grade handwriting. She'd drawn him taller than he really was, stronger, with kind eyes that had never seen death up close. Reed knew exactly what he was destroying, and worse, Chen was going to let him do it because saving Amy meant becoming the ghost again, and being the ghost meant proving Reed's point. The monster had always been real. Everything else was just a 15-year lie wrapped in chrysanthemum tea and children's laughter. The radio crackled with Reed's next words, but they weren't meant for Chen. They were meant for Amy. Sweetheart, your grandfather is listening right now. Would you like to tell him something? Amy's voice came through the static, small and brave and absolutely breaking Chen's heart. Yi, I drew you a new picture at school today. It's a dragon, but a good dragon, like in the stories you tell me. Mrs. Rodriguez says good dragons protect people. Chen's knife clattered to the tunnel floor, not dropped, thrown down with the violence of a man rejecting everything he'd ever been. Because Amy's voice held no fear of him, only love, only the absolute trust of a child who believed her grandfather was exactly the good dragon from her stories. Sweet girl, Reed's voice oozed false sympathy. Your Yi isn't what you think he is. Would you like to know how many people he's killed? Would you like to know why his real name isn't Chen Wei? Stop. Chen's voice carried the authority of 15 years' worth of suppressed command presence. Let her speak to me. Oh, she can hear everything. Can't you, sweetheart? Your grandfather wants to tell you something important. The silence stretched like a blade between Chen's ribs. Reed was offering him a choice. Lie to Amy one more time or destroy her world with the truth. Either way, Reed won. Either way, Chen would be exposed as exactly what Reed claimed, a monster wearing the mask of a man. But Amy's voice cut through the calculated cruelty like sunlight through storm clouds. Yi, are you coming to get me? I'm not scared. I know you'll come. And in that moment, staring at Colonel Hua's tactical radio in a tunnel that reeked of cordite and fear, Chen Wei understood the real revelation that redefined everything. Reed was wrong. Not about the killing, not about the blood on Chen's hands, not even about the lies he'd told himself for 15 years. Reed was wrong about what mattered. Liu Zhao had run because Chen had trained him to be a weapon and nothing else, had taught him precision without purpose, lethality without love, technique without the wisdom to know when not to use it. Chen had created a perfect killer and called it teaching, had shaped a boy's hunger for belonging into an instrument of terror. But Amy Lin had never learned to kill. She'd learned to draw dragons that protected people. She'd learned that tea tasted better when shared with someone you loved. She'd learned that her grandfather's strong hands, the same hands that had ended Liu Zhao's life, were gentle enough to brush the tangles from her hair without pulling. Reed had spent 15 years watching Chen teach children martial arts, waiting for the ghost to emerge in the way he trained them. But Chen had never taught a single child to kill. Every lesson had been about discipline, respect, finding strength in restraint. The man who had forged Liu Zhao into a weapon had died in that hotel room 15 years ago, and the man who'd emerged from the ashes had spent every day since then teaching children to be better than their teachers. "Colonel," Chen said quietly, reaching for his fallen knife, "Reed's been watching the wrong man." "What do you mean?" Chen stood, and for the first time in 15 years, he felt no conflict between the ghost and the grandfather. They were the same person, someone who would kill to protect what mattered, but who'd learned what was worth protecting. "He thinks I've been hiding from what I am, playing pretend with children to escape the guilt." Chen's voice carried a certainty that made the tunnel walls seem less oppressive. "But I haven't been hiding from the ghost. I've been learning what he should have been all along." Reed's voice came through the radio again, but Chen barely heard it. The psychological warfare that had seemed so devastating moments before now felt hollow, irrelevant. Reed was trying to break a man who no longer existed, the Chen Wei who'd believed that love was weakness, that caring for someone made you vulnerable. Amy's love didn't make Chen weak. It made him precise in a way that had nothing to do with killing technique and everything to do with understanding what was worth dying for. "Yi," Amy's voice carried across the radio waves like a prayer. "I can hear fighting. Are you fighting the bad men?" "Yes, little dragon," Chen said to the radio, knowing she couldn't hear his reply but needing to say it anyway. "Grandfather is coming." He looked at Colonel Hua, and she took an involuntary step back, not because she saw the ghost of Guangzhou emerging, but because she saw something far more dangerous, a man who'd spent 15 years learning to love, and who now had to kill to protect what he loved. Reed had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed Chen's greatest weakness was his shame about the past. But Chen's greatest strength had always been his willingness to become exactly what the moment required. The tunnels fell silent except for the distant drip of condensation and the soft static of Colonel Hua's radio. Chen moved through the darkness with renewed purpose, but he wasn't hunting anymore. He was navigating toward a destination that had been 15 years in the making. "There's something you need to understand about Reed," Chen said, his voice barely above a whisper as they picked their way through the maze of concrete passages. "He didn't choose me randomly. The night I killed Liu Zhao, Reed was there." Colonel Hua's footsteps faltered. "What?" "CIA liaison to the Cultural Summit. He was supposed to coordinate security with Chinese intelligence, make sure nothing went wrong." Chen's fingers traced the tunnel wall, reading the subtle vibrations that told him they were directly beneath Chinatown's main thoroughfare. "Instead, he watched me strangle my own student with my bare hands." The memory unfolded like a blade opening. Reed standing in the hotel doorway, his young face pale but his eyes already calculating. Even then, even in that moment of horror, Reed had been thinking 3 moves ahead. "He never reported what really happened that night," Chen continued. "Official records say Liu Zhao was killed by unknown assailants before he could execute the attack. Reed let the world believe Chinese intelligence had cleaned up their own mess. Why would he protect you?" Chen stopped walking. In the distance, he could hear the subtle sounds of Reed's men repositioning themselves, a chess game played with live ammunition in the dark. But they weren't closing in for the kill. They were herding him towards something. Because he understood what I'd become that night. Not just a killer, a weapon that had learned to turn on its maker. Chen's voice carried the weight of revelation. "Reed spent 15 years studying me because he wanted to know if conscience could be weaponized." Colonel Hua checked her ammunition with mechanical precision, but Chen could see the calculation in her eyes. She was Chinese intelligence trained to think in terms of national interest and strategic advantage. The idea of an American agent conducting a 15-year psychological experiment on Chinese soil would have diplomatic repercussions that reached all the way to Beijing. "My orders were to extract you quietly," she said. "Bring you home for debriefing and reassignment. But if Reed's been manipulating the situation from the beginning, your orders are irrelevant now." Chen's tone carried the finality of a man who'd stopped pretending he had choices. This was never about extraction or intelligence value. Reed orchestrated everything to answer one question. Could the ghost of Guangzhou be made to care about something more than killing? Amy's voice drifted through the radio again, smaller now, tired from crying. "Yi, when you come get me, can we have dumplings for dinner? Mrs. Lin said she'd make your favorite kind." Chen closed his eyes and felt the last piece of his old life crumble away. Mrs. Lin, who'd invited him to family dinner every Sunday for 8 years, who'd pressed extra portions of food into his hands with the insistence of someone who understood hunger, who'd trusted him with her granddaughter because she saw kindness where others might have seen only the careful movements of a predator learning to be gentle. All of it built on the foundation of lies he'd told himself about who he could become. Reed's hypothesis was correct, Chen said, opening his eyes. The ghost did learn to love something more than killing, but his conclusion was wrong. Colonel Hua's radio crackled with her handler's voice. "Hua, we've lost contact with your backup team. Extract now or abort mission." She looked at the radio, then at Chen, and made a decision that would end her career. She switched off the transmission. "Tell me," she said. "Reed believes love makes killers vulnerable. That caring about Amy turned me into something he could manipulate and control." Chen began moving again, but now he was following his own map, drawn from 15 years of walking these streets above them. "He's wrong. Love didn't make me weaker. It taught me precision." They reached a maintenance ladder that led up toward street level. Chen could hear vehicle engines above them, not the random traffic of afternoon Chinatown, but the coordinated positioning of a tactical operation. Reed had turned 6 city blocks into a hunting ground, and every civilian in the area was now a potential casualty. Before Liu Zhao, I killed because I was ordered to. After Liu Zhao, I killed because I had to. But everything I've done since Amy came into my life has been about learning when not to kill. Chen placed his hand on the ladder's bottom rung. Reed spent 15 years waiting for the ghost to emerge. He never considered that the ghost might have evolved. Colonel Hua understood first. "You're not going back to what you were." "No," Chen said, beginning to climb. "I'm becoming what I should have been from the beginning." Above them, Reed was waiting with overwhelming force and 15 years of psychological preparation. But Reed had studied the wrong lessons. He'd learned everything about Chen Wei's capacity for violence, and nothing about his capacity for growth. Amy was calling for her grandfather, and her grandfather was finally ready to answer. The maintenance hatch opened onto chaos. Chen emerged into the alley behind his martial arts studio to find Reed's tactical teams positioned exactly where he'd expected, covering every exit, every angle, every possible escape route. Except Reed had made the same mistake every hunter made when they'd studied their prey too long. He'd prepared for the animal he remembered, not the one standing before him now. Amy sat zip-tied to a folding chair in the center of the studio's main floor, visible through the large windows that faced the street. Reed stood beside her, one hand resting casually on her shoulder with the practiced ease of a man who'd used children as leverage before. Around the perimeter, 8 operatives maintained overwatch positions, their weapons trained not on Amy, but on the approaches Chen would have to take to reach her. It was perfect tactical positioning, textbook hostage control. Reed had spent 15 years learning Chen's patterns, his instincts, his preferred methods of engagement. Every sightline accounted for, every weakness exploited. Reed had never considered that Chen might walk through the front door. The bell above the entrance chimed its familiar welcome as Chen stepped into his studio with empty hands and steady breathing. The operatives tensed, confused by his approach, their training warring with the impossibility of what they were seeing. Men with weapons drawn, taking cover behind overturned furniture and reinforced positions, suddenly faced with an elderly Chinese man walking calmly through the space where he'd taught children to bow respectfully for 15 years. "Yi Yi," Amy's voice broke with relief and terror. "I knew you'd come. I knew you—" "Hello, little dragon." Chen's voice carried the same gentle warmth he'd used for bedtime stories and scraped knees. "I'm sorry I'm late." Reed's expression shifted through confusion, suspicion, and finally something approaching respect. "No weapons, no backup, no plan except walking in here and hoping I've developed a conscience." He gestured to his men who adjusted their positions but didn't lower their weapons. 15 years, and this is how the ghost of Guangzhou chooses to make his final stand? Chen moved deeper into the studio with the measured pace of his morning Tai Chi routine. Past the mirrors where he'd corrected Amy's stances, past the metal wall where neighborhood children had hung their tournament ribbons, past the photograph of him and Amy sharing ice cream after her first successful break fall. "You're right about one thing," Chen said, stopping 6 feet from Reed's position. Close enough to act, far enough to think. This is my final stand. But you misunderstood what that means. Reed's hand tightened on Amy's shoulder, and Chen saw her wince. The gesture was meant to remind Chen of the stakes, to force him back into the psychological cage Reed had spent 15 years constructing. Instead, it was the moment Reed revealed his fundamental miscalculation. Liu Zhao, Chen said quietly. You were there when I killed him. I was there when you murdered him, Reed corrected. Your own student. A boy you'd trained from childhood. A weapon you helped aim. The words hung in the air like incense smoke. Reed's expression didn't change, but Amy looked up at her grandfather with confusion beginning to cloud her trusting eyes. She was 8 years old and smart enough to understand that the conversation happening around her was about something terrible. Chen knelt slowly, bringing himself to Amy's eye level despite the weapons trained on him from every angle. Little dragon, do you remember the story I told you about dragons who made mistakes? Amy nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yi, I don't understand what's happening. Sometimes dragons hurt people because they don't know better, because someone taught them the wrong lessons. Chen's voice remained steady, but his eyes never left Reed's face. And sometimes, when dragons learn to love someone very much, they have to make sure they never hurt people again. Reed realized what was happening half a second too late. This wasn't Chen negotiating for Amy's release or pleading for mercy. This was Chen Wei confessing to his granddaughter before he destroyed the man who'd threatened her. You think love made you stronger? Reed's voice carried desperate mockery. Look around, you're surrounded, outgunned. One word from me and your men will kill us both. Chen stood with fluid grace. Yes, you planned this perfectly, Reed, except for one detail. Chen's movement was so subtle that Amy didn't even flinch. His hand brushed Reed's wrist with the gentleness of a grandfather fixing a child's sleeve, and Reed's fingers simply opened. The sidearm that had been pressed against Amy's temple clattered to the floor as Reed stared at his suddenly nerveless hand. You spent 15 years studying how the ghost killed, Chen said as Reed stumbled backward, his entire right arm going limp. You never learned how he healed. The pressure point Chen had touched would leave Reed alive but helpless, a precision that came not from his military training, but from 15 years of treating children's injuries with hands that had once known only violence. Amy looked up at her grandfather with wonder replacing fear. Yi, you're really a good dragon. Yes, little one, Chen whispered as Reed's operatives closed in. I finally am. The tactical operatives hesitated for exactly 3 heartbeats, long enough for Chen to cut Amy's restraints with a shard of broken glass, long enough to position himself between his granddaughter and 8 trained killers, long enough for the world to shift on its axis one final time. But Reed's voice stopped them mid-action. Stand down. The words came out slurred, his arm dangling uselessly, but his authority remained absolute. Chen had given him a choice: die as a failed operative or live as a man who'd finally understood the difference between strength and power. Reed chose wisdom. Sir? The team leader's confusion was audible through his tactical mask. Mission's over, Reed said, sliding down the wall to sit heavily on the studio floor. We got what we came for. Chen lifted Amy into his arms, feeling her small body shake against his chest. She was too young to understand the geopolitics of what had just happened, too innocent to grasp why grown men had pointed weapons at her grandfather's heart. But she understood that the scary man with the dead arm was no longer dangerous, and that Yi's hands, the same hands that had just demonstrated impossible precision, were gentle as they checked her for injuries. Are we going home now? She whispered. Chen looked around his studio, taking inventory of the damage. Overturned chairs, broken mirrors, scuff marks from tactical boots on the polished wood floors where 3 generations of children had learned to fall safely. Mrs. Lin's thermos, somehow still intact on the windowsill, filled with jasmine tea that had gone cold hours ago. Yes, he said, we're going home. 6 months later, Chen Wei reopened the Peaceful Dragon martial arts studio on a quieter street, 12 blocks deeper into Chinatown. The new space was smaller, humbler, with second-hand mirrors and mats that had seen better decades, but the morning light that slanted through the windows carried the same golden warmth. and the children who came to learn still bowed with the same careful respect before beginning their forms. Amy had returned to her old self with the resilience that belonged uniquely to the very young and the very loved. She drew dragons in her coloring books. Good dragons now, she specified, who protected people and made tea and taught children to be strong without hurting anyone. Sometimes she asked questions about the scary day, simple inquiries that Chen answered with simple truths. Bad men had tried to hurt people. Yi had stopped them, and now the bad men were gone. She never asked why the bad men had come for her grandfather specifically. Perhaps she was still too young for that conversation. Perhaps she sensed that some stories were too heavy for 8-year-old shoulders. Or perhaps Amy Lin simply understood what Reed had taken 15 years to learn, that the measure of a person wasn't their worst moment, but what they chose to build from the wreckage. Reed visited once, 3 months after the confrontation. He came alone, in civilian clothes, his right arm still weak but functional enough to carry the small potted orchid he presented as an apology. Chen served tea while Amy practiced her forms in the background, her movements fluid with unconscious confidence. "I spent my career studying weapons," Reed said, watching Amy flow through the sequence Chen had taught her, trying to understand what made them effective, what made them dangerous. "I thought the answer was removing their capacity for anything except violence." Chen poured the tea with steady hands. "And now?" "Now I think I was asking the wrong question." Reed sipped his tea, wincing slightly as his damaged nerves sent confused signals to his brain. The question isn't how to make a weapon. It's how to make a person who knows when not to use one. They sat in comfortable silence, two old warriors watching a child practice movements that were martial in origin, but graceful as water. Amy had inherited Chen's natural balance, but none of his shadows. She would grow up knowing how to defend herself, but more importantly, she would grow up knowing what was worth defending. That evening, after the last student had gone home and Amy had finished her homework, Chen found himself alone in the studio with his memories and his tea. The photograph of him and Amy sharing ice cream after her first breakfall held a place of honor on the new medal wall, surrounded by ribbons and certificates from children who would never know their teacher had once been called the Ghost of Guangzhou. He had been a weapon who learned to love, a killer who chose healing, a man who discovered that true strength wasn't about what you could destroy, but what you could protect. The boy who had trained Lu Zhao to be perfect and pitiless was dead. The grandfather who taught Amy to be brave and kind had taken his place. Outside, Chinatown settled into its evening rhythms. Families gathered for dinner, shopkeepers closed their doors, and somewhere in the distance, a child laughed with the pure joy of someone who had never learned to fear the world. Chen Wei listened to that laughter and knew, finally, what it meant to be free.